Welcome back to Restore Gospel Podcast. I'm Mike Barrett here with Shane Robinson. Shane, say hi.
How's it going?
We are doing, this is part 3 of Restoration History, an honest look, but it's actually part 2 of was Joseph Smith a seer? And in part 1, Shane and I went through some scriptures and we agreed, yes, he was a seer. What we're going to do now is look at a prophecy in 2nd Nephi, where Joseph, or where, I'll tell you what, Shane, as I pull this up, why don't you just give us a rehash of what this prophecy was talking about?
All right, put me on the spot, huh?
Well, starting with coat of many colors, Joseph, talking about what was going to happen. Just a Cliff Notes version quickly.
Right. Yeah, so it was basically referring, I'm going to pull it up online just so I've got the scripture in front of me, but let's see here. Yeah, so it was talking, oh, you got it?
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. All right. Okay, get out of this document. Okay, so yeah, so it's talking about Joseph, the coat of many colors, and it's prophesying that he's saying that he was the one carried into Egypt, so we knew which Joseph we're talking about. You took down the scripture.
Oh, sorry. There you go.
Yeah, and so it was talking about the covenants that have been made, and that Joseph saw our day, and then it starts talking about a seer that's going to be raised up, and it's a promise to Joseph, it'll come from his seed, and that it will, be a blessing to his future generations.
Right. So we're not going to get into Joseph of Egypt and all of the things around that and who he was and types and shadows. But Joseph of Egypt was kind of the chosen little brother of the 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Yep.
His father, his brothers were even jealous of him. He had dreams. He was kind of boastful in his dreams, or proud, or maybe he was just so humble that he came across as proud by being able to say these things. And in his mind, maybe he wasn't bragging. He was just a matter of fact, like, I commune with God, but for whatever reason, sold into slavery and ended up being the salvation for Israel later on as he rose to power in Egypt and was able to bring Israel in and feed them and keep them alive during famine and drought. Correct? I'm really,
Yep.
Yeah. So that was Joseph. So faithful, walked with God. God gave him a promise that later on, part of his seed would be broken off, but not forgotten by God. And he would raise up a seer to bring them back to a knowledge of Jesus, the Messiah.
Yeah, one point to bring out about Joseph is that the pattern that God uses is he always takes, when man humbles himself, God blesses him. And we have that example with Abraham where he was willing to give up his son. And God blessed an entire nation, future nation of people because of that humility. And then Joseph of Egypt, he humbled himself with, in multiple situations, but especially with the king, or with the not king, but I forgot his position in Egypt, the guard or whatever. His wife accused Joseph of harassing her or whatever sexually.
Right.
And he was humble. He wasn't defensive. He interpreted dreams, and was just a humble servant. And because of that, he got blessed and raised to the second in charge of Egypt. I mean, that's just amazing, that story. And so that humility carried on, and same with Moses. It tells us that Moses was the most humble man on the earth in his time period. And so it's always the humility, and I just think that's important to bring out. It's the humility is really the key to this.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to do today, folks, is go through this prophecy in 2nd Nephi. And so my question is just this: was Joseph Smith a seer, or was he the choice seer prophesied here? And I think I don't have a definite answer, but some things point to yes, and some things make me say no. And Shane, you and I haven't really discuss this too much, and you admitted that, perhaps you had that this is a gray area, and that's fine, that because we are just having discussion and not presenting this as, definite fact, and this is what you need to believe. So we're just looking at this, trying to be an honest look. I'll try to play devil's advocate as much as I can, and present both sides of some of these things. But let's just start at the beginning of the prophecy and start going through this here. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right. So, behold, thou art the fruit of my loins. I don't want to repeat all this. I want to get down that there was a branch broken off, but would be remembered in the covenants of the Lord. So this righteous Joseph of Egypt, his seed would not be forgotten.
And
A
we're
seed,
talking, and just to clarify, the branch that's broken off, we're talking about the branch that spilled over the wall into the new world, correct?
right? Which would, as we said, his posterity was Ephraim and Manasseh, and we know specifically Lehi and the Nephites were from the tribe of Manasseh, which also the Lamanites would have been from that. And the Lamanites would have probably, for the most part, what we know were the ones that remained, because the Nephites, having the truth, had become so wicked and rejected the truth. After the great battle, Moroni hit up the plates, and that was that until Joseph Jr. got them. So, a seer shall the Lord God raise up, who shall be a choice seer unto the fruit of thy loins. So we would say, let's put who the fruit of the loins we would think that would be in our vernacular today. Perhaps the American Indians that were here. Perhaps, well, Shane, you spent time in Honduras. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to get too much into the archaeology and
Right.
the
No, no.
who is who, but yeah, certainly the people on this continent are definitely the descendants, American Indians for sure, and I have no reason to not, I have no reason to doubt that they traveled all through the Americas over several thousand years.
Right. And also, the Book of Mormon also talks about its work to the Jew and the Gentile, but we're going to stick specifically to this prophecy here and see how it's relevant. A choice seer will I raise up, uh, so shall be esteemed highly among the fruit of thy loins. So the people here, the Native Americans in this continent, they would look at this choice seer and esteem him highly. Does that say anything different than that to you, Shane?
No, that's that's the way I read it. He's going to
Okay.
be respected and valued, appreciated highly.
So right away, I wonder, is there any way to apply that to Joseph Smith Jr.?
Not that's a tough one. I mean, I would say no. He was not esteemed highly, and in fact, he was. I mean, I guess it depends on who you're talking to, but overall, I would say among the Americans, and certainly among the Native Americans, they didn't even know him, so I wasn't really esteemed very highly.
Right. So I'm going to try to be generous here and say, perhaps in the future, if they come to the knowledge of the covenants found in the Book of Mormon, maybe they would esteem highly the man that did the work. But
Right.
I don't see that has happened yet.
Well, and one other way I guess you could interpret this, and this is kind of where the gray is for me, is if Joseph was seed of Ephraim, then you could say that they're all seed of Joseph, and that among but then again among the seed of Ephraim, if the if Americans or white people, I guess, if they're the seed of Ephraim, I wouldn't say Joseph Smith was esteemed highly among them either. So it really it struggles with putting Joseph Smith as
Right.
that person.
Well, this next one here, I think, could apply to him.
Mhm.
Unto him, the choice seer, will I give commandment that he shall do a work for the fruit of thy loins, his brethren, which shall be of great worth unto them, even to the bringing of them to the knowledge of the covenants which I have made with thy fathers.
right.
I see where that could be, um, that could fit him, correct?
Yeah, definitely it fits, and really that's the purpose of the Book of Mormon is to bring the knowledge of that covenant to the people, the house of Israel. So it definitely would fit in that part.
Right. Well, let's go on here to the next one. I will give unto him a commandment that he shall do none other work save the work which I shall command him. Now that I suppose that could be looked at a couple different ways, because it's already in my mind going to well, a revelation given in the Book of Commandments and Doctrine and Covenants that has a difference in what Joseph's calling was.
Right.
But I think you could look at it like when it came time to translate this work, if the Book of Mormon is this work of bringing them to a knowledge of Jesus, that he did do that and nothing else at during that time. I mean, he worked steadily on that and brought it forth pretty quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it definitely is interesting though that he was told to pretend to no other work um, other than the translation of the Book of Mormon,
Yeah, and
and
we'll
that specifically says that that phrasing. You know.
right, and we'll come up we'll come on to that later on, probably not in this episode, but the next one. But
Hmm.
does this fit Joseph Smith Jr.? He shall be great like unto Moses, whom I have said I would raise up unto you to deliver my people, O house of Israel. And Moses will I and Moses, oh, I skipped it here. What did I do?
I
I just
think you copied and pasted. You moved it.
we're all jumping around. All right, so he
There
shall
you
be,
go, altering scriptures.
and this is where the audio version would be more helpful.
Right.
He shall be great like unto Moses, whom I have said I would raise up unto you to deliver my people, O house of Israel. And Moses I will raise up to deliver my people out of the land of Egypt. But a seer I will raise up out of the, back down here, fruit of my loins, and unto him I will give power to bring forth my word unto the seed of thy loins. I'll fix that later. But so, okay, Moses, get this image of the Red Sea being divided. People are going through. It's this mighty, mighty work. It's given faith to the house of Israel. All of these years, they remember Moses and this great work. It gives them hope that God knows them intimately. And then he says, a seer will be raised up from the lineage of Joseph, the coat of many colors, and he would be like this Moses.
Hmm.
Um, Not to just bring forth the word, but to convincing them of the word which shall have already gone forth among them. So I want to stop here for a minute. Do you, first of all, just do you picture Joseph Smith Jr. as having any similarity to Moses as far as delivering the Native Americans back to the knowledge of Jesus? In other words, delivering them from their maybe their spiritual bondage, their spiritual slavery by not knowing the Messiah, like Moses did to the house of Israel physically.
I wouldn't say, well, certainly not physically, and not spiritually in his lifetime. I guess you could apply this to having brought forth the Book of Mormon, which would free the house of Israel once they read it, and are converted in the future. But there's been no real effort among the American Indians that I know of. Back in Joseph's day, they certainly didn't do a lot. They visited him, but they didn't do much. In fact, I think that's one of the downfalls is they didn't do more when it came to the Native Americans. Um,
What about, okay, so I like this here, not bringing forth my word only, but to convincing them of the word which shall have already gone forth among them. What what do you think about that? The word that, okay, so what word would the natives in this land, if they were the Book of Mormon people, what would they have had that had already gone to them?
Well, it says which shall have already gone, so it's talking about in the future. I mean, the Bible has gone throughout the Native Americans, but I don't know if that's what it's
I,
getting at or not.
I don't know if the ones in this land had already been schooled in the Bible. I don't think that they were known as Christians.
Well,
Um,
they weren't, but there was actually a lot of missionary work done by like the Jesuits, and even prior to this nation being formed, they were taking the scriptures there. I mean, there was a lot of missionaries that went forth among the Native Americans, but in terms of convincing them in large numbers or creating large churches or whatever, I don't think they had a lot of success.
so one thing we could so playing both sides, here's another thought. If Joseph wasn't this choice seer, but he brought forth the Book of Mormon, at some point, if those scriptures, let's say another seer comes along and actually convinces them of the truth of the Book of Mormon that had already gone forth, it had already come forth, but it wasn't really generally accepted, or even, they didn't even know about it. Was there another seer coming that would finish that work among them? And we'll go further on in the prophecy, but that may help clear this up a little bit. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it could be that the word went forth with the Book of Mormon, and that if he wasn't that choice seer, then there could be more truth. Maybe the sealed portion will be read or exposed, or you know or maybe just spiritual power to show them that that wasn't just words that were some white man's book, but it was actually the truth of the covenant that that he had with their fathers.
mhm.
I don't know. There's a lot of ways to. There's a lot of detail there. I haven't ever. Probably a good work would be to sit down and make a checklist, write down all the statements that were made, and then compare them to, yes, this fits perfectly. No, this doesn't quite fit, and just really look at them side by side and see, because some of the stuff that we think is not fitting, there may be something else we don't understand, or some angle that we haven't considered. You know.
Well, let's go on here and see. This is going to talk about the fruit of thy loins shall write, which would be Joseph, the coat of many colors, and the fruit of the loins of Judah shall write, which we would say would be the Bible. And
Mm-hmm.
that which shall be written by the fruit of thy loins, which we would say would be the Book of Mormon, and that which shall be written by the loins of Judah shall grow together unto the confounding of false doctrines, laying down of contentions, and establishing peace among the fruit of thy loins, and bringing them to the knowledge of their fathers in the latter days, and also in the knowledge of the covenant, saith the Lord. And out of weakness he shall be made strong. Now we're talking about the choice seer. And in that day, when my work shall commence among all my people unto restoring thee, O house of Israel, saith the Lord. And thus prophesied Joseph, behold, the seer will the Lord bless, and they that seek to destroy him shall be confounded. Now that's interesting.
Yeah.
Those that seek to destroy him shall be confounded. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it doesn't apply to Joseph Smith that I can tell. He was certainly destroyed, and the people that sought to destroy him were not confounded. And there may have been things that God did to preserve him to finish the work, but I would say that history does not bear out that he was protected really in any way. He pretty much ran for his life everywhere he lived, and ended up being murdered. So
Mhm. I'm trying to look at it from another angle. I guess you could say that during the translation or the bringing forth of this word, though people tried to get the plates and take them, that at that point he was not confounded. He was able to finish his work and produce the record.
yeah,
So I guess that's another way to look at it. But I certainly don't see the fact that, well, he was killed before I saw anybody acting like a Moses to deliver the people out of their lack of knowledge on the Messiah. That uh, he definitely didn't live to do anything like that, in my opinion.
yeah. Yeah, and that you bring up a good point about him having been protected while he was doing the work of the translation. There were certainly some really cool testimonies about how the books were the plates were protected and that kind of thing. But I would say post Book of Mormon, he was not living a charmed life.
So verse 27, for this promise of which I have obtained of the Lord, of the fruit of thy loins shall be fulfilled. Behold, I am sure of the fulfilling of this promise. Now, who's speaking here? We got to back up again. Thus prophesied Joseph. So Joseph, the coat of many colors, is writing this, I guess, to his, or is this Lehi speaking?
Let's see.
This might be Lehi speaking about the prophecy of Joseph. Because remember, Lehi speaking, and he's saying, thus prophesied Joseph. He's speaking of the Joseph of Egypt.
So Joseph is speaking. And thus prophesied Joseph, saying, right?
Right. Yeah, like you said, you got to look at what Lehi's reporting and what Joseph's saying and what the Lord's saying. So
yeah, this has got a lot of layers.
So thus prophesied Joseph, saying, behold, that seer will the Lord bless. They seek to destroy him shall be confounded. For this promise of which I have obtained of the Lord, of the fruit of thy loins, shall be fulfilled. Behold, I am sure of the fulfilling of this promise. So it's like 3 times it's saying that he won't be confounded, right?
Mm-hmm.
And his name, okay, so this is a big one. And his name shall be called after me. This is Joseph speaking, and it shall be after the name of his father. That's huge.
It is.
We've got Joseph Jr. and Joseph Sr. So that definitely applies or could apply if the rest of the prophecy fits in.
Right.
Now, it seems like it's obvious the restoration keys in on that because it's almost too easy. It's almost too, I mean, it's right out there.
Yeah.
We know of Joseph Jr. and his father, and it's awful easy to just say, well, this is applying to Joseph. How could it not be? He was named after his father.
Right. And this is one of the few times in scripture where a person of the future is named. You know, Jesus's name was given, but another another human or whatever being named in a future in a prophecy is very specific. Usually they're more obscure than that. You know.
You know, Shane, that's a great point. I'm my mind now is like Rolodexing through what do I know? Do I know of any other prophecy that referred to a specific name? You said one of the few times, and I think that's a
Yeah, I can't think
a
of
good
anything
way to
offhand. Yeah.
phrase it, just in case there's another. But I'm not thinking of one off the top of my head right
No,
now.
I can't come up with one, especially when you're naming not only the person but the name of his father too.
Mhm.
It really narrows it down. You know.
I'm sure our listeners will let us know if there is another one out there, and we would appreciate it. But he shall be like unto me, for the thing which the Lord shall bring forth by his hand, by the power of the Lord, shall bring my people unto salvation. Well, we definitely know that's the promise of the Book of Mormon, to return them to a knowledge of Christ,
Right.
to convince them that he is God, the eternal God, the eternal Father.
Yeah,
And
and
you could say,
it will. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
well, there's room here for this to possibly still happen.
Right. Well, and yeah, and it says it will lead his people to salvation. I mean that part has not happened for sure. Whether or not the seer part has happened or not, that's a little gray. But that definitely they don't even know as a whole as a body. They don't know the promises that God has given them and the covenants that they are able to claim.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up while I'm doing this, if it works, to pull up the verse in context. It may not do it through the software, but anyway, I thought there was more to that I may not have copied over that just talked about not being marred and other things. But we'll skip that for now. Just for the so backing up, looking at this, kind of backing out a little bit at this whole thing. A mighty work is definitely prophesied. It seems to me that this choice seer was called to a very high calling to be like a Moses, compared to Moses to lead the people forth, and save them, just as Moses did the house of Israel. I mean, this is very clear. And Moses will I raise up to deliver thy people out of the land of Egypt, but a seer will I raise up out of the fruit of thy loins, and give him power to bring forth my word, to convince them of the word that shall already have gone forth. That I don't think applies to Joseph Smith Jr. at all.
Right.
I just don't.
But the only way that it would apply would be in a spiritual, as a spiritual thing. You know, Moses led the people out of bondage physically out of Egypt, and really he did spiritually too. You know, when they were faithful. Uh, but Joseph, if you think about it, over the last 2,000 years, name one thing that has been as impactful as Joseph acting as seer and bringing forth the Book of Mormon. I can't think of anything that has any close to the impact on humanity, you know, as far as freeing us from tradition and freeing our, you know, being let loose of the bondage of man's plans for us, and then the bringing forth the Book of Mormon. The part that's great for me is, you know, when it's talking about my seed, meaning Joseph's seed, uh, you know, um, it, it's the Book of Mormon came to the Gentiles. It didn't come to
Mhm.
the seed of Joseph. So he can't be the seed of Joseph and the Gentiles. That's
Yeah.
where I'm, you know.
And the Book of Mormon prophesies that, that the Book of Mormon will come forth by way of the Gentile, to go back to the Jews. Yeah, so we wonder, why is this important to even discuss? Was Joseph Smith the choice seer, or was he a seer? Uh, well, I think as we see things in the future unfold, um, there still needs to be the fact that the remnants of Joseph, the house of Manasseh, has to come to a knowledge of the Messiah, and they haven't yet. And you wonder how that's going to happen. And sometimes we keep putting that on us, the Gentiles, right? We need to take the Book of Mormon out, and we need to get our act together and be missionaries and take the covenants back to the people, and do missionary work to the Indians on the reservation and all of that. But if there's one that's going to be raised up from their seed to convince them of the word that's already gone forth, I think that's another way to look at this whole section of prophecy.
Yeah, I agree. I
So
agree.
that's where I see it as being pertinent, and also where I think it gives us a little hope, because it's the difference between continually beating yourself up for your failures and looking forward to hope that the prophecy already says that there's going to be one among them that helps do this work.
Yeah. Well, and I think this will all be tied into them blossoming as a rose, and the time of the Gentiles being fulfilled, and the time of Israel, you know, taking over. Uh, it's all tied together. The problem is our view of the timeline is so narrow. You know, we can't necessarily see because we don't know the future, so we don't really know what parts of this haven't played out yet or haven't happened yet.
Yeah, and this takes us back to the what we brought up on the last episode at the beginning about looking at restoration history with an honest look, knowing that we all have biases. And I grew up thinking of this as Joseph Smith. I still hear it taught that Joseph was the choice seer. Just wondering, do I have a predisposed bias because I've heard something so many times? Is there a different way to look at it? If by looking at it a different way and exercising faith in that, does it give me hope? I don't want a false hope that something's going to happen to fix everything if it's not true, but there's definite promises here that they're going to be convinced. And it says the commencement of the gathering of the people is going to happen at that time. So here, just a little side note: since 1830 to present day, Corey put up a graph of this in one of his classes. Those new listeners, Corey's my podcast buddy, going way back to our audio podcast, and we've got some classes on our YouTube channel that he's taught. He put a graph up, and it showed um, from 1830 on just the number of Jews that have returned to Israel, to Jerusalem, to their homeland, and it definitely was coordinated. I mean, it's when you look at history from a small point, you're like, yeah, but when you look back at, if you look back through time and realize how long they were absent and not possessing that land, to think that in the last less than 200 years that has happened, kind of in coordination with the coming forth of the Book of Mormon, is pretty amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like it isn't planned by man either. It's all just sort of happening behind the scenes, right, by God,
Isn't that the truth? Yeah, he's doing that work sometimes in spite of man and what man would want to do. Remember the outcry when President Trump wanted to bring the embassy back to when he was in office? It was for the
Right.
first time. So, well, anything else on this? I really wanted to bring up the scripture. Shane, talk for a minute. I'm going to try to.
You
I
keep
do.
doing that to
Sorry.
me.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to bring up Second Nephi. What is it? 5. Let's just do this. Second Nephi 5. What was those verses roughly? Can you still see the?
Yeah. Well, the last one is 13, but I think we were down up into like 20 something.
Okay, let's just start at 23 and see where this goes. Okay. Yeah. Well, we won't do this now. Well, this maybe we can bring this up later. Anything else on this prophecy before we go on?
I don't think so. And I don't think that we should get, sort of wound up in the wheel in this. I think it's definitely hopeful, whether it's already happened or it's going to happen or only part of it's happened. It's definitely a hopeful thing for the house of Israel, and we as Gentiles, we will be assisting in that work, and that's exciting that we get to be a part of that.
Right. Well, bringing us back to our topic was Joseph Smith a seer? We both agree he was. As far as prophet, seer, revelator, let's look a little bit at what else Joseph was called or maybe not called to do, and go from there. We'll continue on here. This is the Book of Commandments, and I think I have a slide that might show this a little better.
Do we want to give a little bit of a background of what the Book of Commandments is for those that may not be aware?
Sure. Do you want to do that, or do you want me to? Go ahead.
Yeah, I can. I'm going off memory here, so correct me if I missed something. But so Joseph Smith began recording the revelations that were given by God. The initial ones were done with the Urim and Thummim. I think there was around 9 or so of them that were done through the Urim and Thummim, where God just gave him direct words to write down. The rest were given at various times and recorded. And they were kind of kept separately. Some were in his hands, some were in others' hands. He had a lot of people writing for him sometimes as scribes. He wasn't a very good speller, so sometimes people would. I think he probably preferred someone else do it. So they had kind of a collection of revelations, and they decided to compile them into a book that could be given out. They published a lot of them in the Times and Seasons. I think that was the right. Is that the right one? Times and Seasons?
No,
Or is
it
it
would have
the
been the earlier ones.
Messenger and Advocate? Or I can't
Evening,
remember.
mornings, yeah.
Or Mornings. Yeah, maybe that was it. Anyway, one of those early church newspapers. It was published. They, yeah,
Kirtland, right?
correct. Yeah. And so they had quite a collection put together of these, and they decided they wanted to make them all available and print them for the church people to have. And so in Missouri, they started, it was W.W. Phelps, right? Was the printer.
Yeah, and it's my understanding Oliver took a copy of the Revelations to Independence to print. Um, but also these revelations, you can go to the Joseph Smith papers and you can look under documents and you can go in chronological order and see when they were given, the timeline, and look at the earliest existing copies today. That doesn't mean that was the earliest, but whatever exists. Now, some of them you can see the handwriting in the Revelation books. There was a book kept where the revelations were being put in. Some of those you can actually view, and I would say probably good idea that they were the original. So the idea that Joseph's sitting somewhere and writing down revelation after revelation in his own handwriting is probably an incorrect view of history. Joseph would give a revelation, at the time, probably maybe expected, not expected. Maybe they were praying and then it came forth, but there was a scribe that would write down that revelation. And as priesthood members became aware of these, it's my understanding different copies would be written down so that they could take and share with others. And that may have been a little bit later on where most of that happened. But it's hard to know what was the actual original copy. I would say the Revelation book is probably a good idea to believe those are some of the first, if not the first, recorded copies that were used to print. Other ones now, the earliest copy is just the Book of Commandments that was printed off of the original ones because the actual handwritten original ones are taken out of the Revelation book or not found. So you can go and look and under each document, you just click on source and it'll tell you where it came from, whether it was the Revelation book or whether it was the Book of Commandments, and you can see the original source. But that's important because our next point is this, that there was a revelation given talking about Joseph's calling as seer, correct?
Right, right. And well, let's finish the story real quick on the
Oh,
history, just so we
yeah.
know what happened. So they got all these things together. They took it to Independence, and they decided to print this book, and it was going to be called the Book of Commandments. And they compiled it. They had it all compiled and was at the printer in the process of being printed when the mob destroyed the press and took all the pages and threw them out into the streets. And so there was I believe it was a couple young girls that came out and gathered up all the sheets. And so they gathered them all up and they came up with about 100 sets of finished works. And I've read a lot of places say they weren't finished, but my thinking is if they have 100 copies and they were at the printer, why would they be at the printer if the work wasn't done? It's not like your home computer where you're just typing and you're going to add a little bit later. When you're at the printer, when you're typesetting and all that, you got the finished work in your hands, and it's going to be printed. So anyway, that's just a side
Right.
note, but
Yeah. Because the body of work brought to Independence, um, I mean, it was handwritten copies of the Revelations. They brought with them what they intended to print,
right.
and as the printing press was destroyed, another topic for another time. But yeah, people thought, well, they have this idea. We're trying to print a book of scripture. We were interrupted in the middle of it. Um, and so it didn't get finished. Well, what didn't get finished was maybe as many volumes as they had intended to print and bind, but the sets that they did collect, I think, was the finite group of scriptures that were intended to be printed at that time.
Yeah, and I think I read somewhere that original copies of the Book of Commandments are the most expensive, most valuable item that, like there's a lot of things that the LDS will purchase, the churches, and they're the most expensive item, even older than original Book of Mormons, or
Yeah,
more expensive. I mean,
sold for I want to say million, but
yeah,
yeah.
by a lot. Yeah,
Well, I
but
should
yeah, so
probably turn mine in, I guess, instead of
yeah.
keeping it under the bed.
Right. Well, and these are found in different places around the country. There's some museums that have them, and The LDS have some copies, and so they're around.
And they've been it's reprinted. You can go online and get it, I think, on the Kindle. I have one. I mean, so it was able to be reprinted and reproduced at a later date. And David Whitmer had a copy in his. So they salvaged the printed manuscript, though it wasn't finished and bound in a book, is my understanding, and we're able to produce it. But that brings us anything else on that history?
Well, just I don't know. Do we want to mention about what the Doctrine and Covenants then came later, or
So right. Well, let's look at what the actual scripture in the Book of Commandments says, and then look at the Doctrine and Covenants that was printed, I think, 2 years later, and what that same revelation says, and then compare the differences, and then we can get in maybe to why that was printed and why they were different.
Okay.
So here's chapter 4 of the Book of Commandments, revelation given to Joseph and Martin Harris in Harmony, Pennsylvania, because Martin was desiring to know of the Lord whether Joseph had in his possession the record of the Nephites. So he hadn't seen those yet.
Can you put it up on the screen? We can't see it.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Let's do this. Better?
Yeah, much better.
Okay. So Martin wants to know, does Joseph really have them? So here's a revelation that says, I say unto you, my servant Martin has desired a witness from my hand, that my servant Joseph has got the things which he has testified, and borne record he has received of me. And now, behold, this shall you say unto him. So God telling Joseph to say to Martin, I, the Lord, am God, and I have given these things unto my servant Joseph. And I have commanded him that he should stand as a witness of these things. Nevertheless, I have caused him that he should enter into a covenant with me, that he should not show them except I command him. And he has no power over them except I grant it unto him. So in other words, Joseph doesn't have the freedom to just choose who and when to show the plates to unless God tells him.
Right.
And that's the covenant he made with God. And he has a gift to translate the book, and I have commanded him that he shall pretend to no other gift, for I will grant him no other gift.
Well, and it's before you go on to that last sentence, it's interesting that that he made a covenant with God.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty important. I mean, you don't mess around with a covenant. So I think that what ended up happening with the 116 pages, yeah, he was breaking that covenant.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, by repeatedly asking God the
right.
same kind of question over and over.
Right.
So that's it. That's the end of this short revelation. I have commanded him that he shall pretend to no other gift, for I will grant him no other gift. You can read this actual revelation is an original document with the handwriting, I believe, of Oliver Cowdery. And I have read it. I've got a picture of it somewhere, but I'm not going to pull it up now. It's in the Joseph Smith Papers, chapter 4 of Revelation, March 1829. So now we're going to look again. This is Revelation given March 1829. This is section 32 of the Doctrine and Covenants, printed in 1835. By the way, I copied these from the Hemlock Knots website where they compare different things. That's why these are highlighted. The greens and the oranges are differences. Some are added, some are taken out. But you can find them there and compare any two copies of Doctrine and Covenants through time with each other. It's kind of a neat little tool. I say unto you, my servant Martin Harris, let's get to the differences, have got the plates which you have testified and borne record. He who spake unto you said unto you, I, the Lord, am God, and have given these things unto you, my servant Joseph Smith, Jr., and have commanded you that you shall stand as a witness of these things. And you shall not show them except to those persons whom I command you, and you have no power over them except I grant it unto you. So that's kind of similar. And you have a gift to translate the plates. This is the first gift that I bestowed upon you. And I have commanded you should pretend to no other gift until my purpose is fulfilled in this. for I will grant unto you no other gift until it is finished.
So this was the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, correct?
Yes, yes. Um,
So Book of Commandments was saying you pretend to no other gift, and then they basically added don't basically they said um, no other gift until this is done, and then I'll give you some other gifts. Is kind of what it's
right.
saying,
I
right?
commanded here's Book of Commandments. I have commanded him that he shall pretend to no other gift. He's talking about his gift is to translate the book. And I've commanded him that he shall pretend to no other gift, for I will grant him no other gift. So that's pretty clear. End of story. Now the Doctrine and Covenants says, and I have commanded that you should pretend to no other gift until my purpose is fulfilled in this, for I will grant unto you no other gift until it is finished. Definite, two definite different outlooks, different pictures of what Joseph's work is, and quite different in meaning when you look at the what happened after the Book of Mormon was translated, right?
Right. Yeah.
So let's try to be honest here and give a couple perspectives. First perspective could be Joseph's calling was plain and simple: translate the Book of Mormon and then preach the Book of Mormon. You know, take it to the Lamanites, the remnants, um, show them who the Messiah is, explain the book to them. You know, teach the doctrine contained in the book, the plain and simple doctrine. That's your gift. That's all I'm going to give you, nothing else. And another perspective would be, well, that original revelation wasn't exactly printed correctly, and there's a more correct version. And so the second time around, we're going to print a more correct version. And that is that perhaps Joseph would have some other gifts, but it would come later after the Book of Mormon was translated.
Right.
So I'm not saying which one is correct, but what's the implications, Shane, if the Book of Commandments is the original revelation from the Word of God? What's the implications um, that Joseph's only gift was to translate the Book of Mormon?
Well, I guess it really goes back to what are we talking about when we're talking about a gift? So, we all have a lot of gifts. So, is it referring to his personal gifts, or was it referring to his gift as a seer? What he was to bring forth the Book of Mormon, and that was it. And that's how I would read the Book of Commandments. Um, if he was a seer, and I just we have I don't know how they could have got it wrong unless it was dictated incorrectly, or maybe the printer didn't put all the phrasing in that was supposed to be there. It definitely seems a little odd that would be edited 2 years later to read that now he has other things he's supposed to do.
So one theory I heard was as Oliver is in Independence, and they're setting up the printing press to print the Revelations. I mean, there would have been opportunity for him to put his little touch on the Revelations, or maybe say, well, this isn't how I quite remembered it. This is actually what was said, and let's make sure this is correct. I mean, that nobody Joseph was still in Kirtland at the time, I believe, at least when this started. So uh, that's one theory that Oliver could have put his little spin on it. Um,
Mhm.
but it seems weird that it would be taking away something rather than adding to something if that was the case. In other words, Oliver, if the actual revelation said this is your first gift, and when this is done, perhaps there will be other gifts. Why would you take that out and say no other gift?
Right.
Now, if the first revelation says, and I will give you no other gift, and Oliver thought, well, there's more work to be done. I think I'll just, what this needs to say is no other gift at the time until it's complete. Like it seems to me, if anything was changed, it would have been reversed the other way, not taking away Joseph's scope of ministry, but adding to it, if anything.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. I mean, if we're going to question intent here, we have to look at what would be the motivation. So would Oliver wouldn't have had motivation to take stuff out for Book of Commandments, uh, but they did have motivation to add things in because they had formed a new church, they had set up all the priesthood, they had done all these things. And you go to print the Doctrine and Covenants in 1835. The church has already been going for 5 years. You can't really come in and say that Joseph wasn't called to do some of the other things that he did after the Book of Mormon. So there is motivation there to correct that. I guess the question there would be, Joseph, what part did Joseph play in that process? And obviously, he obviously approved it, or that would not have become, presented to the church as the canonized scripture.
You say approve the Doctrine and Covenants?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, and there seems to be there's approval on the Book of Commandments because those revelations were given to Oliver, were taken to Independence. And let's just go over the timeline. March of 1829, this revelation was given. The church was not officially organized. It was
Right.
operating. There were spiritual gifts. David Whitmer in his book to the saints says, if anything, the spiritual gifts were most powerful in those years, that time period where the Book of Mormon came forth before the church was officially given a title as an organized body, but they were already having the gifts of the Spirit. Church is organized in 1830. However, this revelation's already present in 1829, along with some other revelations. They go out to Independence. They start getting printed. The works are saved and later put into volumes. And then a couple years, and then 1830, the church is organized. Book of Commandments is printed in 1832, but the revelations are still some of the revelations given before the church was organized. So this
Right.
revelation is given in 1829. It's the revelation. Church is organized. Let's print these revelations. Now, 2 years later, Doctrine and Covenants is printed. Oops. This revelation said, really, there's no other gift. My only work's to do the Book of Mormon. We've already organized a church. We've started calling priesthood and setting things up. This needs to be not so finite and like you only have one work, maybe. That's another line of thinking.
Right. Yeah. Have you seen anywhere where Joseph Smith, where they were told to do the Book of Commandments, where they were told to compile the scriptures or compile the revelations and make a book of scripture? I haven't done a lot of searching on that. Have you read anything on that?
Yes. David Whitmer's book, An Address to All Believers, he reports a discussion he had with Joseph Smith Jr. And I'm not going to have the actual, where I can bring it up where you can see it, but I have it. I have the book. I've read it a couple of times. I'm going to report the gist of it. If I get anything wrong, forgive me. You can get this on the Kindle on Amazon. It may even be free. It's not very expensive. It's called An Address to All Believers, I believe. David Whitmer wrote several things, a proclamation that though people said he denied seeing the plates and that the Book of Mormon, he, to his dying day and in his latter years, put forth a proclamation with a number of people in the community signing that he was a sound character, that he believed in the Book of Mormon, that he never denied it. He wrote some other things in some interviews with a Chicago paper, I believe. And he also wrote this proclamation to all believers. And part of it is to those that believe in the Book of Mormon. And then part of it is to those that maybe aren't members but need to know about the work. And I'm just paraphrasing here, but his conversation with Joseph Smith was such that he did not believe they were supposed to be printing these revelations. And there is one revelation that he bases this off, and it says, like, don't present these to the world until I command you. And we confirm up this stuff in our next broadcast, so that we get it exactly right. But this is how it goes for the most part. And he said that he and Joseph were at odds. Joseph wanted them printed. He said, no, the way I look at this revelation, God's telling us don't. And he said that was a big barrier between him and Joseph. But this is why I like David Whitmer and why I think his character is really, really sound and full of integrity, because he also mentions in there, but I loved brother Joseph, and I didn't let this come between us as um, so he always puts that in there, and I like that. I like that he didn't make it personal, but that he was able to disagree, but it didn't change his feelings for Joseph. So there was that thought process, and that is because I think the point was made that some of these revelations are talking about, chosen land, and how are the people the people that are existing there read about uh, this chosen group of people, and this is their inheritance, and Zion being set up, and some of these things, they're not going to respond too well. And maybe that was why God didn't want them to go forth yet to the world. Maybe
Right.
that's why the printing press was destroyed. I'm not sure what all revelations had been printed in the paper at the time. So yeah, there's some history to go into here, but I hope we're giving our listeners enough information that they can go and discover these things.
Yeah.
You
One thing I'd say about David Whitmer, and growing up, I was kind of told, or I don't know, the word is, basically it was told me that David Whitmer was apostate, that he was excommunicated, that he left the church in 1838 or whatever, and I guess the because of the way I thought at that time, I just discounted everything he said. But when you go back and you read, I didn't read all of his stuff there, but I've read quite a bit of it, and the spirit that it carried. He was at late in life, and he's looking back on his youth, and he was really regretting how things had gone. And he said, and one thing that really stuck out with me was when he said that the spiritual gifts, tongues, um, the healings, all the manifestations of the spirit were greater prior to the organization of the church. Basically he was making the case that they had the church already, that they didn't need to officially, April 6, 1830, create the organization. And he said that that was kind of the turning point where all the things just sort of started, changing. But he looked back on his history and basically said that that was the time where it was the most beautiful, where that's the time from when the Book of Mormon was given to up to April 6, 1830, that area. And maybe it just has kind of always kind of it's stuck with me since I read it, that maybe we have gotten so kind of wound up in the axles of all our doctrine and organizational stuff that we've missed that pureness. And I think if you read the Book of Mormon, you start seeing how simple the gospel really is. And I got that feeling reading his words, that he was lamenting that things had got so complicated.
I also grew up thinking David Whitmer was kind of, well, you hear the Whitmerites, and we talk about biases and things that are ingrained in you. Whenever I heard anybody bring up the Book of Commandments, I just shut it down. Like, oh, they're just a Whitmerite. I'm sure they probably don't believe in high priests either, and these things, because there's a whole host of things I had heard about him. And then I said, well, let's go to the source and actually read what he said. And what I want to do a whole broadcast or two on this book and go through some of the things from his perspective in the early restoration, because he really when he's trying to make a point, uh, he gives a few examples, and he says, I could give many more, but I'm not here to tear down the character of anyone. I've already made my point, and so I'm going to stop. He always exercised charity, and that says a lot about a person. He didn't have an axe to grind. He was trying to just share his story without hurting anybody, and I appreciate that.
Right. Yeah.
Well, so this is a big one. We're not the first people to talk about this. This is really huge. This is a basis, a foundation for a philosophy. Early on, was the church starting to go in a direction that wasn't correct? Was Joseph overstepping his bounds, or was the Lord granting unto a group of people what they desired, even though the Lord didn't desire this? Was this one of those situations where, all right, you want kings, you're going to have kings, but kings become unrighteous and they lead people into to hurt, right? Or you want to you want to go in this direction, you keep asking me, okay, I'm going to grant you what you want, but you're going to reap the rewards of that. So um
Yeah, like the 116 pages. We don't have the Book of Lehi because of that principle.
yeah, yeah. So let's wrap up here for this one. Why is this important? It's good to look at things honestly. Again, we look at the fruit of where we're at. Was there something that could have been done better, even as early on as 1830? Um, does this mean that all of the testimonies of grandma and grandpa and my forefathers and Oscar Case and all of JJ Cornish, does that mean that all of these people were just faking it and making up stories? No, absolutely not. Does it mean that the church was that God didn't, just turned his back on the restoration, in 1830 because Joseph decided to do something? No. And doesn't perhaps God was blessing what they were doing in spite of the fact that it wasn't plan A, or maybe it was plan A, but we're just trying to look at things honestly and realize it's okay. And it's okay to know that there's a huge difference in the very beginning of the church between these two revelations. And why was one added to later?
Right, right. Well, and I think, like you said, the fruits. We really have to look at our fruits and really be honest with ourselves. I mean, I'm not saying that we're not seeing the fruits, we're not seeing God's blessings at all. But when you listen to how they talked about how things were, where they were speaking in tongues, they were having, seeing visions, they were being visited by angels, they were, Joe Smith had the plates brought to him and given back and forth multiple times with the Urim and Thummim. And it was like a daily and weekly occurrence that they were having these wonderful spiritual experiences and witness and experiencing the fruits. And it lays out pretty clearly in the Book of Mormon why the fruits disappear. And they disappear because the people dwindle in unbelief. And then there's another verse in Mosiah that says that people dwindle in unbelief because of the traditions of their fathers. And so we have to look at those two things. How have we dwindled in unbelief? And what are the traditions of our fathers that are wrong, vain traditions of our fathers? If we aren't able to look at those honestly, then we're doomed.
Yeah, as a reminder, the Book of Mormon coming forth was to restore plain, precious truths. Yea, even so, it says, even so plain that men could not argue it, and yet they still reject. I think the sad thing in the church is that so much was added and so much things besides the plainness, that the plainness was lost right from the get-go. And the black and white, simple facts of who Jesus is and his plan for us were muddied with all kinds of other things and keys and mysteries and a very complicated hierarchical structure. So this is just our first question. Was Joseph Smith a seer? Yes, he was. And yes, he translated the Book of Mormon with the Urim and Thummim. That's my belief. Shane, any
Yes,
final words?
I believe that 100%. I'm so thankful that God works through him and the book came forth to us today.
Okay. Well, we'll pick back up. I'm not sure how much more on this topic will go. I did want to kind of talk about a seer a prophet and revelator, what that might mean. Um, but we'll continue on, and no agenda here other than take some of these talking points, do some research yourself. The interwebs are just great. They got all kinds of material out there now that you can look at and absorb. And most of all, are you looking at these things with an honest heart, trying to overcome bias? And always pray. I pray that I could love the truth more over and above my own pride, my own bias. I need that help from Jesus to take me over that, to sincerely desire to know him and to know how and what to repent from and how to change to be better. So I thank you again for being here, brother. Anything else?
I guess just one thing to add to what you said is we have to study things out, but I would encourage people to don't get Don't get twisted up in just studying history, but also spend time in the Word, reading about spiritual things. I think you got to be balanced, and there's certainly a lot out there, and we have to come at it humbly and ready to learn from
That's a
time.
good point, Shane. And seeing some of the other people researching, sometimes I denote a little, what's the word? Not when you're snot, just cynical. A little
Mm-hmm.
bit cynicism jumps in, a little bit of joy is taken out, and certainly when you look at these things, you can switch from an honest look into let's debunk everything and show the conspiracies, and that becomes its own little plan, its own little animal. And we want to approach this with an eye of faith, wanting to know truth, wanting to know what went wrong, what went right, and what we need to do today, and where our hope lies.
Absolutely.
Until next time, God bless. I'll use Corey's phrase. Remember, we are all just walking each other home, and be kind to one another. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.